Hey friends, welcome to Haunted Bedtime. Before we get started, just a quick note. There are only a few ads during the first 15 minutes, and after that, it's completely ad-free. Just you and me. If you enjoy the calm vibes here, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if it genuinely feels right to you. And I'd really love to know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Share it in the comments. It's always amazing to see how this little community connects people all around the world. This story really begins with the very first time I ever tried to conduct a séance. I was about 17 years old, still at that age where you feel grown up but still do a lot of things out of pure curiosity, without really understanding what you're playing with. My youngest brother was there with me, and he had two of his friends over. They were all around 15 at the time, full of that restless, teenage energy and excitement, always looking for something interesting to do. I can't remember exactly what sparked the idea. Maybe it was a movie we'd watched, maybe it was a story someone had told us, or maybe it was just that we all had an interest in the unknown and wanted to see if there really was something else out there. Back then, I didn't know much about the dangers, the warnings, or the rules that people talk about now when it comes to seances and Ouija boards. It was just that simple curiosity that pushes young people to poke at things that might be better left alone. We decided to sit in the lounge room. It was the middle of the day or evening. I honestly can't remember the exact time, but I remember the feel of the room. The furniture had been pushed back a little to give us space. The TV was off, the lights were dimmer than usual, and there was that quiet hum of still air when everyone is waiting for something to happen. We sat in a circle right in the middle of the room, cross-legged on the floor. I was the oldest, so naturally they all looked to me to lead the way, even though I had no real idea what I was doing. We joined hands to keep the circle connected. My brother sat on one side of me, one of his friends on the other, and opposite me sat the remaining boy, Warren. I didn't have a script or anything prepared. I just used the sort of lines you hear in movies or read online. I probably said something along the lines of, "Is anyone here with us? If there is any spirit who wants to communicate, please make yourself known." Simple, clumsy words, but spoken seriously. At first, there was nothing, just the sound of our breathing and the faint noises of the house settling. I think all of us were excited at the start, but also a little nervous. You can feel that strange mix of this is probably nothing, and what if something really happens? It had been only a minute or two when something unexpected happened. The boy sitting on my left, Warren, suddenly went limp. One moment he was sitting upright like the rest of us, holding my hand and my brother's hand. Then the next, his head dropped forward and his body slumped in toward his crossed legs. His eyes were closed. His posture went into an odd, twisted kind of crouch, like someone whose strings had been cut. It didn't look like a natural way to sit if you were just pretending. His neck was bent at an uncomfortable angle, and his shoulders sagged heavily. My first thought, being a teenager and knowing how teenagers often behave, was that he might be trying to prank us. I remember thinking, is he serious, or is he about to jump up and yell, "Boo"? I kept waiting for him to suddenly snap his head up and laugh, or shout, or do something silly. Teenagers love to scare each other, and if you're sitting in a circle doing a séance, it's the perfect opportunity for a joke. But I also knew Warren. By nature, he was quieter and more conservative than the rest of us. He wasn't usually the one pulling pranks or trying to be the center of attention. It felt out of character for him to put on some big act and stay committed to such a long time. Still, I didn't know what else to think at first. We were all a little bewildered that he had just folded in on himself like that. I decided to continue. My hands were still linked with his and my brother's. I kept guiding the séance, asking more questions, even though I can't remember exactly what they were now. I probably repeated variations of the same ideas, asking if a spirit was present, asking if it could give us a sign, asking if it had any message. The others stayed mostly quiet and followed my lead, their hands still joined, sitting in a circle around Warren's still slumped figure. Time passed slowly. When you are young and sitting still, 10 minutes can feel like an hour. I would guess now that the whole session lasted somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes, but it felt longer than that to us. And through all of it, Warren stayed in that same position. He didn't flinch, didn't twitch, didn't snicker. His head stayed down, his body stayed folded forward. After a while, my original suspicion started to fade. Even a teenager playing a joke would get tired of holding that uncomfortable pose. Neck muscles get sore, legs go numb. It's hard to stay perfectly still just to fool some friends. The longer he stayed that way, the less it felt like something he was doing on purpose. I don't remember exactly how I ended the seance. I might have said something like, "Thank you for coming," or "We are closing this session now," in that awkward way you do when you're trying to copy something you've only seen on TV. What I do remember clearly is what happened when Warren came out of it. He seemed confused and frightened. He sat up and looked at us like he'd just woken from a deep sleep and didn't quite know where he was. He had no memory of what I had said or what had been happening in the room around him while he was in that state. To him, there was a gap, a missing piece of time. While we had been sitting there watching him and continuing with the seance, he had been somewhere else entirely. When he tried to explain his experience, he told us that, inside his mind, he had seen a flash of bright light. It wasn't like the light in the room. It was something different, sharp and sudden. After that, he said he saw his grandfather. His grandfather had passed away some time before. Warren described this as if his grandfather had come forward out of that flash of light and appeared in front of him. It wasn't vague. It wasn't just a feeling. He was sure that it was his grandfather, and his voice shook a little as he tried to tell us. Listening to him, I had the strong sense that whatever had happened during that seance had not really been about me, or my brother, or his other friend. It felt like, through the link of our joined hands and the clumsy invitation I had spoken out loud, something had used the opportunity to reach out specifically to Warren. It felt like we had unknowingly opened a door, and someone had stepped through it to see him. That was my first real attempt at a seance, and it stuck with me. I didn't fully grasp the weight of it at the time, but it left a mark. I learned that even when you think you're just playing around, you might be doing something much more serious. Years passed. Life moved on, as it always does. We all got older, and I didn't rush to repeat the experience. But the paranormal stayed in the back of my mind, especially as I started reading and later sharing stories on sites where people talk about their ghostly experiences. About 4 or 5 years after that first seance, I found myself in another situation that brought me back into contact with the spirit world. This time, I was at my eldest brother's place. He was living with his de facto wife, Bev, at the time. Also with us that night was Claude, the brother of Bev's ex-husband. Bev's ex-husband had died in a violent way. He had been killed in a street brawl some years earlier, leaving her and their daughter alone with painful memories and a lot of grief. By the time I found myself sitting in that house with Bev and Claude, she had already moved on in life to some degree. She was now with my brother and had built something new. But the past doesn't just vanish, especially not when it involves a sudden and tragic death. It was one of those nights where conversation flows and time slips by. We talked about life, family, loss, and all kinds of things. Eventually, in the quiet hours, long after my brother had gone to bed, the idea came up to try and contact the other side. I can't say exactly who suggested it first, but the thought settled between us like a serious invitation. There was a strong pull toward trying. We didn't have a proper Ouija board. We decided to make our own makeshift version. We found a flat surface we could use as a table. Then we wrote out letters, numbers, and maybe a yes and no on pieces of paper and arranged them in a circle or pattern similar to how Ouija boards are usually laid out. It wasn't perfect or fancy, but that didn't matter. It was enough. We chose a glass to use as the planchette. It was a solid glass, turned upside down so its smooth base could slide over the surface. It felt heavy enough that it would be hard to move it around quickly or smoothly without really pushing it. Once everything was set up, we sat down around the table. It was just the three of us now, me, Bev, and Claude. I found myself at the helm again, leading the session. I rested the tips of my fingers lightly on the glass, and so did they. We took a moment to focus, to quiet ourselves, and then I began, again using the basic kind of phrases that come naturally in these situations. I invited any spirit who wished to speak with us to come forward. I opened the space with words, even if I can't recall them perfectly today. Almost immediately, the glass began to move. It didn't creep slowly at first like someone testing the waters of a prank. It moved with purpose, sliding from one letter to another, spelling out a name. Our fingers barely touched it, just resting on the edge, and yet it moved as if guided by an unseen hand. The name it spelt was that of Bev's ex-husband. The moment that name became clear, a change came over Bev. You could see her emotions rise up, shock, hope, sadness, and longing tangled together. We all felt it. The air in the room seemed to get heavier, the atmosphere more focused. It didn't feel random. The glass moved confidently, not hesitating as if someone was trying to think of the next letter. It felt like it had its own mission. We continued, letting the glass move wherever it wanted, watching it spell out words, letter by letter. I don't remember every detail of the questions and answers that came at first, but I know we were all completely drawn in. We were watching something that felt bigger than just the three of us sitting at a table. Then a thought came to me. I wanted to be sure that what we were experiencing was real, and I wanted Bev to have her own proof. So I made a suggestion. I asked Bev to remove her finger from the glass. I told her that I would keep mine on it, and Claude would keep his on it, but I wanted her to step slightly back from the physical contact and instead ask questions only she knew the answers to, questions that only her ex-husband could answer properly. This way, we could test whether this was really him speaking or just our subconscious minds or wishful thinking. She agreed. She lifted her finger, leaving only my finger and Claude's on the glass. Then she began to ask questions. They were personal, specific questions about things from their shared past, details only the two of them would know. I don't remember the exact wording of each one now, but I know they were not vague things like, "Do you love me?" or "Are you okay?" They were concrete, testable questions. Each time she asked, the glass moved quickly and smoothly, spelling out answers that made sense to her. On almost every single question, the answer that came through was correct. Sometimes I could see the recognition on her face before she even said anything. Her eyes would fill with tears or widen, and you could tell the answer that appeared was something meaningful, something she knew to be true. She would confirm it softly afterwards, explaining how the answer matched something only he would have known. She became emotional in that unique way people do when they are both happy and sad at the same time. There was comfort in feeling like he was there, but also pain because he was gone. It was as if a wound had been touched gently and kindly, but it was still a wound. As we continued, another thought occurred to me. I wanted to push the boundary of what was possible a little further, not out of disrespect, but out of a desire to understand just how strong this connection was. I suggested we try something else. I asked Claude to take his finger off the glass. That meant that there would only be one finger left touching it. Mine. It might sound simple, but anyone who has used something like this will know how hard it is for one person, with one finger, to push a heavy glass around in fast, fluid motions, without it looking or feeling forced. I wanted to see if the glass would continue to move as confidently, or if it would slow down or stop completely. Claude lifted his finger. Only my fingertip remained lightly touching the glass. To our astonishment, the glass kept moving just as quickly and deliberately as before. It didn't drag or hesitate. It slid across the table surface, still clearly spelling out letters. It felt like I was barely touching it, like it didn't need me at all, but was just using that tiny point of contact as an excuse to move. I can't remember if Claude asked some of his own questions at that point, but it's possible that he did. What I do remember is the sense we all had that this was not one of us pushing the glass around for fun. It felt like we had genuinely made contact with Bev's ex-husband that night, and that he had used the board to validate his presence in a powerful and personal way. That second experience stayed with me just as deeply as the first seance had. It showed me that the other side can reach across when there is a strong emotional bond, and that sometimes they respond when you reach out. Fast forward to 2010. By this time, I had already had other strange experiences, but one of them changed my whole concept of the paranormal. I had an encounter that I later wrote about in a story called The Woman in Black. It involved the murder and discovery of the body of a woman found not far from where I live. That experience shook me to my core and changed the way I looked at life, death, and what might come after. When I shared that story and others on a paranormal site, there was a lot of discussion between myself and other members. We talked about what had happened, what it might mean, and what might still be out there, unseen but very real. One thing led to another in those conversations, and eventually an idea formed. With the encouragement of some It was suggested that I try using a makeshift Ouija board again, not to talk to a loved one this time, but to try and seek answers about a very serious situation. A missing child. This time, the task felt huge. The emotional weight of it was heavier than anything else I had done before. We weren't just asking for comfort or for proof of life after death. We were trying to see if it was possible to gain information that could help in a real, active case. There were no guarantees. We didn't even know if it was right to try. But eventually, with a mixture of caution, respect, and hope, we decided to go ahead. Unlike the previous times, I came into this third attempt more prepared. I made notes of every question I asked and every response that came through the board. I treated it like a serious record, not just a casual session. Later, I would share these transcripts with our group in a private space, and we would go over the details together. I won't go into the full story of that third session here, because that's tied to another part of the journey, something I later called the verdict part 2. What I will say is that the information that came through was chillingly accurate. Some of the details were only confirmed later, and they lined up in ways that were hard to dismiss as coincidence. I was lucky in a way, because this time I had other people as witnesses, sensible, thoughtful people who took note of what I shared and compared it with what eventually came to light. Because of laws and the sensitivity of the case, I had to wait before I could fully talk about everything that happened and everything that matched. It wasn't a story I could just throw out into the world right away without thinking of the consequences for real people involved in the situation. So I waited, and I kept those records safe. Looking back over all of these experiences, the first seance with my brother's friend slipping into a trance, the second night with the makeshift Ouija board where Bev's ex-husband reached out, and the third, more serious attempt to help in the case of a missing child, I can see how each one built on the last. Each time I stepped into that space between our world and whatever lies beyond, I understood a little more about how real it can be and how careful we must be when we go there. What started as teenage curiosity grew into something much deeper and more serious. And even now, when I think about it all, I can still feel the weight of that unseen world sitting just beyond the edge of our ordinary lives, waiting sometimes for us to call, and sometimes, just sometimes, choosing instead to call us. I live in this house with my mom and my siblings, and ever since we moved in, it has never really felt like just the living ones are here. Different spirits seem to pass through from time to time. Sometimes it is just a feeling. Sometimes it is little sounds. Sometimes something moves when nobody is near it. But among all the passing presences, there is one that never really leaves. She feels like a permanent resident, like the house belongs to her as much as it does to us. I think of her as the woman in the doorway. My bedroom opens out into the lounge room. From my doorway, if I stand or sit in the right position, I can't see the whole lounge room itself, but I can see the opening that leads from the lounge room into the dining room and kitchen. That doorway, just an ordinary opening between two parts of the house, is where she spends most of her time. She doesn't show herself during the day. In the daylight, the house feels normal, busy, and noisy with everyday life. But at night, when the lights are dimmed or off and everything gets quiet, that is when she comes. I don't see her like I would see a normal person. I have never seen her face clearly, never seen her standing there with full detail as if she were flesh and blood. What I see is more like a shadow or silhouette. Sometimes she looks like a darker shape against the darkness of the hallway. Sometimes I catch a glimpse of movement, like someone pacing slowly back and forth, stepping in and out of that doorway between lounge room and kitchen. Other times I feel her before I see anything, this cool, calm, watchful energy resting just beyond my door. Even though I haven't seen her clearly, I feel like I know what she looks like. It is hard to explain how, but the feeling is so strong it is like memory. In my mind, she has her hair pulled up into a high bun, the kind of neat, practical hairstyle women used to wear when they were working around the house. I sense that her hair is a medium brown color, not very dark, but not light either. I feel that her skin is white and that she is of average height, neither tall nor very short. She isn't heavy, and she doesn't feel like a fragile, tiny person either. She is somewhere in the middle. In my mind's eye, she is always wearing the same clothes. She wears a light blue dress with long sleeves, the sort of simple dress a working woman might wear every day. Over the dress, she ties a white apron around her waist. It hangs down over the front of her skirt, plain and practical. The overall effect reminds me of a maid, or maybe a housekeeper from an older time. Like, she still thinks she has tasks to do here, rooms to check, doors to pass through. Most of the time, she just stays near that doorway, pacing slowly, going in and out of the space between the lounge room and the dining room. Sometimes she seems restless, moving back and forth, like she is checking something or waiting for something that never comes. Other nights, she feels quieter, just standing in the doorway or standing slightly to the side, as if she is on guard or just watching over the house. She usually leaves me alone. I don't get the feeling that she is out to harm us. She is more like something that has its own habits and routines and just happens to share the same house. It is almost like she is going about her own business, and we are the ones in her way. But even though she is not always interacting with us directly, she definitely has likes and dislikes. And one of her strongest dislikes is when that doorway has its door closed. There is a door that can be pulled shut between the lounge room and the dining room/kitchen area. Most of the time, especially at night, we leave it open. It makes it easier to move around the house, and the open space makes the house feel bigger. But every now and then, someone closes that door. Maybe it is to keep the warmth in the lounge room in winter, or to stop light from the kitchen shining into the lounge when someone wants to sleep. Whatever the reason, she does not like it. When that door is shut, the whole feeling in the house changes. It is as if she becomes frustrated. Instead of pacing through her usual spot, she starts hanging closer to my bedroom. If I am in bed with the light off, I sometimes glance toward my doorway and see a darker shape standing there. It is not my dog, not my sister, not a pile of clothes. It is too tall, too still, too deliberate. It feels like her, standing in my doorway and staring into my room because her usual path is blocked. Sometimes, instead of standing in my doorway, she goes into my sister's room and stands by her bed while she sleeps. My sister doesn't always feel her there, but I do. The air goes still and heavy. The feeling is strange, not always threatening, but very intense, like someone watching closely, thinking deeply, taking in every breath and every small movement. Other times, when that door in the lounge to the dining room is shut, she comes all the way into my room. Those are the nights when she is not content to just stand and watch. She will get more active. She might shake the bed a little, not violently, but enough to make it clear that she is there and she wants attention. She might make small noises near my head, like little taps or soft rustling sounds that have no physical source. At other times, I will feel the light sensation of fingers in my hair, lifting strands, twirling them softly, or brushing along my ears. It doesn't hurt, but it is unnerving. Waking up to someone playing with your hair when nobody visible is there is not exactly comforting. Over time, I got used to her in a strange way. I learned to feel her moods. Sometimes she felt neutral, just present. Sometimes she felt slightly annoyed, like when the door was closed. Sometimes she felt almost sad, like she was trapped in a loop of old habits she couldn't break. I am not usually terrified of her. Most nights, she is just part of the dark, something I acknowledge silently and try to ignore so I can sleep. Then there was that one night that changed things. It started out very normal. I was up late with my mum, sitting in the lounge room. Everyone else had gone to bed. Mum and I sometimes stay up later than the others and watch movies together. It is our quiet time. That night, we decided to watch a film called White Noise. It is a movie about ghosts and how they can communicate through static on televisions and radios. The whole plot is based on contact with the dead, on messages coming from the other side. The movie itself was creepy enough. It had that eerie atmosphere, the strange sounds, the sudden appearances. I remember feeling a bit uneasy while we watched it, but being with Mum made it feel safer. We commented on parts of the movie, made little jokes, and talked about whether or not we believed similar things could happen in real life. Of course, somewhere in the back of my mind, I was thinking about the woman in the doorway and all the things that happen in our house. It is hard to watch a ghost movie and not think about your own ghosts. By the time the movie ended, it was about 1:30 in the morning. The house was completely quiet. The glow from the TV faded as Mum switched it off. Shadows settled back into all the corners. The only sounds were the soft creaks and sighs of a house at night. Mum yawned, stretched, and announced that she was going to bed. It is funny because Mum can fall asleep almost anywhere at any time. As soon as her head hits the pillow, she is gone. We both went to our rooms. My sister was already asleep in her bed when I came in. My dog was curled up on my bed near my legs, breathing softly. I got ready for bed, switched off the main light, and lay down. The room was dim, lit only by whatever weak light filtered in from outside. I lay there in the quiet, listening to the low sounds of my sister's breathing, my dog's soft little snuffles, and the distant dull noises of the house. Mum, true to form, fell asleep straight away in her room. For me, falling asleep is never that quick. It usually takes me about 45 minutes to an hour to drift off, even when I am tired. My mind takes time to slow down. I think about my day, about random worries, about plans for tomorrow, or sometimes just nothing in particular. That night I was also thinking a bit about the movie, about the spirits and the messages, and whether we had ever been that close to something like that without even knowing. I was lying on my back, staring up into the darkness, when I felt it. At first, it was just a slight change in the air around me. The room suddenly felt more crowded, as if someone had quietly walked in. The hairs on my arms and the back of my neck stood up. It was a strong, heavy presence, and it seemed to be focused around my bed, especially near my head and upper body. I tried to push the feeling away the way I usually do. I thought to myself, it's just my imagination, it's just because we watched that movie. I tried to turn my thoughts to something else, to pretend I didn't notice. But it didn't fade. It got stronger. My heart started to pound faster and harder. The calm, slow beat of someone ready to sleep turned suddenly into the racing pulse of someone who feels they are in danger. I didn't know why I was suddenly so scared. I just knew that my body was reacting as if something was very wrong. The presence pressed in closer, almost like someone leaning over the bed, looking down at me. I tried to move. I wanted to turn on my side, or sit up, or even just move my hand. But I couldn't. My whole body felt like it had been nailed to the bed. It wasn't like normal stiffness or being too tired. It was like an invisible weight holding me down, like something had locked every muscle in place. I could feel my fingers, my arms, my legs, but I couldn't make them obey me. Then I heard it. Deep breathing. It wasn't my sister's breathing. I could see her out of the corner of my eye, in her bed. She was lying in the opposite direction, and the rhythm of her breaths was light and steady, the soft breathing of a sleeping girl. It wasn't my dog's breathing either. My dog was curled up next to me, and I could hear her small, gentle breaths and little sleepy sighs close to my side. This breathing was different. It came from beside my bed. It was close, too close. It sounded like someone standing right next to me, maybe even leaning over me. The breaths were slow and heavy, deeper than mine, deeper than my sister's, deeper than my dog's. There was a weight and a darkness in the sound. It was not the breath of someone calm and peaceful. It sounded more like the breathing of something that wasn't entirely human, or at least not entirely friendly in that moment. For a second, I thought maybe it was me. Maybe I was breathing harder because I was scared. I decided to test it. I held my breath. The deep breathing did not stop. I stayed there, holding my breath until my lungs burned, and in that time the heavy breathing beside my bed continued, unchanged, rising and falling at its own pace. That was the moment I knew, without argument, that it was not coming from inside my own body. Something else was there, breathing right next to me in the dark. My fear shot up from nervousness to full-on terror. My chest tightened, not just from holding my breath, but from the feeling that I was trapped. I tried again to move my arms, my legs, my head. Nothing worked. I couldn't even turn my head to see what was there. I was lying on my back, completely pinned down by something I couldn't see. Then it got worse. I felt something flat being pressed down onto my face. The sensation was weirdly specific, like a book or a flat object was being held over my mouth and nose. Not quite hard enough to crush me, but hard enough that I felt smothered. It didn't feel like hands, not like fingers or palms. It felt like an object, smooth and broad, being pushed down. The pressure wasn't enough to block all my air, but it was enough to make me feel helpless and panicked. I tried to scream. I opened my mouth, or at least I thought I did, but no sound came out. My throat felt tight, my voice trapped somewhere inside my chest. My lips might have parted, my lungs might have tried to push out air, but no actual words left my body. The only things I could hear were the deep breathing near my bed and the rushing of blood in my own ears. Time stretched. The whole episode probably only lasted about 3 minutes, but it felt like forever. When you are lying there unable to move, unable to speak, with something unseen pressing on your face and breathing heavily right next to you, every second feels like a minute, and every minute feels like an hour. My mind raced through thoughts I couldn't fully catch. I thought of the woman in the doorway. I thought of the movie we had just watched. I thought of my mother sleeping down the hall, unaware. I thought of my sister, only a few feet away, completely oblivious. I imagined never getting up again. At some point in that fear, I focused on the one person who was closest to me and who might be able to help, my sister, Chloe. With all the effort I had left, I tried again to move my head. This time I managed to turn it just a little, just enough to feel my neck muscles respond. It was like pushing through thick mud, but I did it. My voice came out in a small, strained whisper. Chloe? It was weak. I could barely hear it myself, but I forced myself to say her name again. Chloe. Over and over again, I pushed her name out of my mouth with every bit of strength I had. Each time I spoke, it came out slightly louder. My throat felt dry and tight, but I kept going, thinking that if I just kept saying her name, eventually she would wake up. At first, she just mumbled in her sleep. I saw her shift slightly, heard a sleepy noise that didn't make any sense. But the urgency in my own voice grew. I managed to make my words clearer. Quickly, Chloe, I said, forcing the sentence out in the strongest voice I could manage. Turn on the light. I had to repeat it. Chloe, quickly, turn on the light. Please, turn on the light. My voice sounded strange, even to me, thin and desperate, not at all like my usual tone. Something in my tone must have finally reached her properly. She sensed that something was wrong. In one sharp movement, she threw herself upright and turned toward the light switch. Her hand shot out and she flicked it. The light came on. The room was suddenly flooded with brightness, yellow and harsh after the darkness. The moment the light snapped on, the deep breathing stopped. The weight on my face lifted. The pressure that had held my body down vanished, as if someone had just stepped away and released me. I bolted upright, gasping, my whole body shaking. For a second, I just sat there, staring at the spot beside my bed where the breathing had been, where the unseen thing had been standing. There was nothing there. Just the floor, the wall, and ordinary shadows cast by the bright overhead light. Tears started streaming down my cheeks without me even thinking about it. The fear, the relief, the strangeness of it all crashed over me at once. I tried to explain to Chloe what had happened. My words tumbled out in broken pieces. Something was in here. I couldn't move. It was breathing. It put something on my face. I felt ridiculous and terrified at the same time. Chloe listened, still half shocked from being jolted awake like that. She could see from my face that I wasn't making it up. She saw the way my hands shook, the way my voice trembled. She believed me. We both sat there for a while, the light still bright above us, the room looking so ordinary and yet feeling so wrong. The dog stirred and stretched, looking at us with sleepy confusion, as if she had not sensed anything, or as if it had not bothered her the same way. That night, neither of us really slept again. We stayed in our beds, but we left the light on. The shadows felt too alive, too crowded. Even with the light, every little noise made my heart jump. Every creak, every rustle, every distant thump felt like it could be something else coming back. We finally drifted off here and there, more from exhaustion than from true rest. But it wasn't real sleep. We slept with the light on for the next 2 nights as well. I was too afraid to be alone in the dark, especially in that room. I kept seeing that doorway in my mind and imagining that breathing starting up again. Every time the light flickered or dimmed, or even if a bulb buzzed, my chest tightened. After those 2 nights, we slowly went back to our normal routine, switching the light off at bedtime and trying to pretend that nothing had changed. And in one way, nothing did. That exact experience never happened again. I never had that same kind of intense paralysis where I couldn't move or speak, with the breathing and the pressure on my face, not like that. But in another way, things were different. Even now, I still sometimes get the feeling that something sits at the end of my bed. I will be lying there at night, and the end of the mattress will feel slightly heavier, like someone has perched there watching. Sometimes I feel a weight near my feet, not enough to sink the bed deeply, but enough to feel the shift. When I look, there is no one. My dog might be curled up somewhere else. My sister might be facing the other way, fully in her own bed. The presence feels separate from them, quiet and heavy. I often wonder if the thing that came into my room that night was the same woman who stands in the doorway, the one with the high bun and the apron, or if it was something else entirely. The woman in the doorway doesn't usually feel that dark. She can be annoying, unsettling, and a bit demanding, especially when the door is closed, but she doesn't usually feel so suffocating or so heavy. The breathing, the pressure, the paralysis, that all felt darker than her usual energy. It could have been her in a different mood, triggered by the movie we watched, by the late hour, by something that stirred her up. Maybe seeing a story about spirits trying to make contact made her more determined to be noticed. Maybe closing doors and changing the patterns of the house can upset spirits more than we realize. And that night, something boiled over. Or maybe it wasn't her at all. Maybe because our house seems to get a lot of different spirits passing through, something new had wandered in that night, drawn by the energy of the movie, by our thoughts, by our sleepy, unguarded minds. Maybe it just wanted to see how much power it had over me, how much fear it could cause in 3 minutes of pressing down and breathing in the dark. I don't know. That is the truth. I can guess, I can feel, I can compare energies, but I don't have a clear answer. All I know is that the woman in the doorway is still there. Almost every night, if I pay attention, I can sense her. Sometimes I see the outline of her shape in that doorway between the lounge room and the dining room. Sometimes I feel her walking past my room, pacing in her slow, steady way. Sometimes I wake up with the sense that she has been in my room again, standing near the bed, or sitting at the end of it for a while, just watching. Most nights, I try not to think too much about it. I live my life. I talk to my family, do my normal daily tasks, laugh, eat, and work like everyone else. But when the house quiets down and the lights go off and everything is still, a part of me is always listening, always aware. I am listening for the soft sound of movement in that doorway, for the feeling of eyes on me, and most of all, for the sound of that deep, heavy breathing that I hope I never hear again. I had traveled to one of the big cities here in Australia to visit a friend. It was meant to be a simple trip. A few days away from normal life, catching up, hanging out, maybe exploring the city a bit. Nothing about it felt strange or heavy. The building my friend lived in was just another ordinary place, one of many in that part of town. There was no creepy history attached to it, no stories about deaths or hauntings, nothing that would make you look twice. If you had walked past it, you probably wouldn't have noticed it at all. It just blended in with the rest of the street. Inside, everything also seemed normal. Old, a little worn in places, but normal. No cold spots, no strange smells, no weird feelings when you step through the door. You know how some houses feel like they're holding their breath? This one didn't. It just felt like a lived-in home. The layout of the place, though, was a little unusual and kind of confusing at first. I'll try to explain it as clearly as I can. When you came in, there were a few rooms arranged around a hall and a sort of shared space. Off one side, there was a bedroom. Directly across the hall from that bedroom was a lounge room, which worked as the main living area. The lounge room was like the middle link between a couple of other rooms. If you stood in the lounge room and faced the back, there was another bedroom at the rear, slightly off to the right with French doors. On another side, connected to the lounge room, there was a sunroom. The sunroom had big windows and let in a lot of light. From other openings you could see into the kitchen, which sat past these spaces, connected through doorways and openings rather than one straight corridor. It was the kind of layout that made more sense once you walk through it a few times. But the first time you see it, it just feels a little odd, like the house had been added onto over the years, rather than planned all at once. There were 4 of us staying there that week. My friend who lived there, his roommate, the friend I traveled down with, and me. The atmosphere between us all was relaxed. We had been laughing a lot, staying up late, doing little things like a casual photo shoot in one of the rooms just for fun. It felt like a small, easy break from normal life. The morning that everything happened started like any other normal day. My friend and his roommate both had work and had to leave early. They were out of the house by about 6 in the morning. I remember hearing them moving around quietly while it was still dim outside, the front door opening and closing as they left, and then the house settling back into that deep morning silence you only get when most people are either still asleep or already gone. A few hours later, around 11, the friend I had traveled with decided to walk down the street to the supermarket. We'd been talking about what to eat later, and he wanted to pick up a few things. I was happy to stay behind. I'm the kind of person who can happily spend an hour or more with a book, especially when the house is quiet. So around just after 11, I was alone in the building. I was in one of the bedrooms, reading. The bedroom itself felt calm. The curtains let in enough light to read by without feeling too bright. The bed was comfortable. Everything was still. I wasn't thinking about anything strange. My mind was just in my book, and the rest of the house faded into that soft background awareness you have when you know you're safe and alone. Then, suddenly, I got this strong urge to move. It wasn't like a casual thought, not like, oh, I might go get a drink, or I should stretch my legs. It felt more like a push, a strange pull that told me very clearly, go to the sunroom. The feeling was so sudden and so strong that I didn't question it much. I just closed my book, put it down, and got off the bed. I walked out of the bedroom, across the hall, and into the lounge room, which sat between the hall and the other spaces, like the sunroom and back bedroom. As I stepped into the lounge room, I automatically glanced toward the back of the house, in the direction of that rear bedroom that sat slightly to the right and had the French doors. That was the room where we had done our photo shoot the night before. We had spent a bit of time in there, moving things around, laughing, changing poses, adjusting lighting. Because of that, I had a fairly clear memory of what the room had looked like when we finished up and left it for the night. That's why when I looked toward that back bedroom, something immediately felt wrong. A piece of furniture had been moved. It was one of the chairs we had used during the shoot. I remembered clearly that we had left it on one particular side of the room. But now, as I looked in from the lounge room, it was on the other side. At first I thought maybe I was mistaken, so I paused where I was and mentally replayed the night before. I pictured us moving the chair around. I tried to see if there was any moment when we might have left it where it was now, but no. In my memory, it was definitely on the opposite side of the room. This wasn't a tiny shift, like someone bumping it a few inches. It had been properly moved. That gave me a small, sharp jolt of unease. My friend and his roommate had left the house at 6, and they weren't exactly the type to come home in the middle of the morning just to move a chair and go again. My other friend had only just left for the supermarket a few minutes ago. Nobody else had been in that room. Nobody else had walked past me while I was reading. And yet something had changed. While I was standing there trying to make sense of it, I became aware of something else. I started to hear noises. They weren't loud at first, just small sounds that didn't match what I should have been hearing in an empty house. I heard the very soft sound of something like doors moving. Not the front door, not the room door, but something lighter and smoother. In my mind, I connected it to the French doors of that back bedroom. I had this very clear sense that those French doors were opening. I could almost feel it as much as hear it, like the air shifting in a particular way. In my mind, I could see those doors opening inward, though I was still in the lounge room and not looking directly into the bedroom at that exact angle. I also had the strange feeling of curtains moving. The odd part was that, as far as I knew, there were no curtains there to move, at least not the kind I was picturing. But I could sense the movement anyway, like fabric swaying in a small breeze. Then I heard footsteps. They were not my imagination. They were clear enough and heavy enough that I could feel them as much as hear them. I watched the floorboards in front of me, the wooden boards of the lounge room, and I saw them dip slightly, the way they do when someone walks on them. With each step, the boards sank just a little, and I heard them squeak, the old timber making that familiar complaining noise under weight. But there was no person. Nothing recognizable was in front of me, just the floor, the doorway, and that unsettling dip in the boards, like the invisible outline of someone approaching. I knew something was moving toward me, even if I could not see it in a solid form. I reacted on instinct. I stepped to the side, my body automatically trying to avoid direct contact with whatever was walking along that path towards the lounge room. I didn't know what would happen if it reached me, but every part of me screamed that I shouldn't stand directly in its way. As I moved aside, I shifted my focus. Instead of staring at the back of the house, I turned my eyes toward the doorway I had come through earlier. That door led back toward the hall, and from there, the kitchen. I felt, more than saw, whatever it was pass by me and go through that doorway, moving towards the kitchen. I stood completely still, listening. From the direction of the kitchen, I began to hear more sounds. Cupboard doors opening, the faint clink and rattle of glasses being moved or touched, the sort of small, everyday noises you'd expect to hear if someone were making themselves a drink or putting dishes away. The only problem was that I was supposed to be the only one in the house. My mind tried to make simple explanations. Maybe one of the others had come back without me hearing them. Maybe I had somehow missed the sound of the front door. Maybe a neighbor shared a wall and I was hearing things through it. But deep down I already knew that wasn't it. The sounds were too clear, too close. They were happening in our kitchen. There were other noises too. Small movements that I couldn't easily identify. A soft thump here, a light scraped there. Nothing huge or violent, but constant, like someone moving around calmly, going about some task. Then I heard the sound of water. The kitchen tap turned on. I heard the stream of water running into the sink. It was a very normal sound, and in any other situation it would have been comforting, everyday background noise. In that moment, though, it sent a shiver through me. An unseen presence had walked right past me, into the kitchen, opened cupboards, rattled glasses, and turned on the tap. At some point during all of this, I had moved into the sunroom without really thinking about it. I think my body just wanted more space and more light. The sunroom was a bright area, more open, with a table in it. I ended up standing behind that table, using it as a kind of barrier between myself and the rest of the house. It wasn't that a table could protect me from anything unseen, but it felt like having something solid in front of me gave me a tiny bit more control. From where I stood in the sunroom, I was now on the opposite side of the room from the bedroom that sat behind the lounge room. There was a wide opening between the lounge and the sunroom, almost like a large doorway without a door, and I could see through that opening clearly. The sunroom windows let in more daylight, so the contrast between light and shadow in that area was sharp. I could hear the kitchen tap still running for a moment longer, then the water shut off. The silence that followed was heavy. Then I heard it again. Footsteps, coming back. They started from the direction of the kitchen and moved toward the lounge room. Slow, steady, with that familiar sinking and creaking of floorboards. Something had gone into the kitchen, moved around, done whatever it wanted to do, and was now returning to where I was. I didn't know what to do. Some people say they would run, others say they would shout. In that moment, my body made the decision for me. Instinct took over. I didn't run. I cowered. I shifted my weight so that I was standing on my left leg, my right leg lifted up as high as it could go, almost like I was bracing myself to kick or protect my lower body if something came too close. My torso twisted slightly to the right, so I would not be facing the opening straight on, but would still be able to see it from the corner of my eye. My arms came up on their own to protect my chest, elbows bent, hands drawn close, almost like I was curling in to shield my heart and lungs. It was a very small, very defensive posture. I went completely silent. I stayed that way, like a statue, behind the table. My eyes were fixed on the open space where the lounge room met the sunroom. I could hear the footsteps getting closer, coming through the lounge room, heading right toward that opening. Then it reached the opening. The moment it came to that threshold, something in me snapped. A wave of fear so intense it almost felt physical surged through me, and I started to scream. I didn't see a body, a face, or a solid figure. It was more like I saw the space change, the feeling of something there suddenly becoming so strong it forced a reaction out of me. As I screamed, another sound overlapped mine, the sharp sound of something smashing on the floor. It sounded like a plate or a glass hitting the ground and breaking into pieces. I could almost see it happen in my mind's eye, even though when I glanced quickly, my actual eyes did not register any object there. It was a strange mix of sensing and seeing something that was not physically visible. It felt like the echo or memory of something smashing, like whatever was there had knocked into something in some other layer of reality. Then it came toward me. Whatever had stopped at the opening when I began to scream did not stay there. It moved forward, straight at me, closing the gap between us. My body still didn't move. I was frozen in that half-twisted, one-legged stance behind the table. The only thing that changed was my hands. They moved from protecting my chest to covering my face. My fingers spread slightly so I could still see between them a little, but my palms pressed against my skin. It was a natural reaction, like a child hiding from something they don't want to see. I felt it grab me. There was pressure on my shoulders, one hand on each side, pushing down and inward at the same time, exactly the way someone would grip your shoulders if they were trying to steady you or hold you in place. It was firm. I could clearly feel the sensation of fingers wrapping over the tops of my shoulders, thumbs near my collarbones squeezing. I screamed again. Inside my head, over the sound of my own voice, I heard a man's voice. It wasn't out loud in the room. It wasn't coming from my ears. It was in my mind, like someone speaking directly into my thoughts. "Don't scream," it said. "You're okay." The words were clear and calm, but there was tension in them too, like whoever was speaking was trying to convince both of us at the same time. I wasn't sure whose panic was greater, mine because I was the one being grabbed by something unseen, or his because he was trying to reassure me while also reacting to the situation in his own way. The presence didn't let go of me right away. It pulled me to the left. Remember, I was standing on my left leg, my right leg raised. When it pulled me left, it made me shift my balance, forcing me to adjust my stance or risk falling. It was not a gentle nudge. It was a purposeful tug, like it wanted to move me from where I was standing. The grip on my shoulders stayed tight for a few seconds even after it moved me, as if whoever or whatever it was wanted to make sure I was really in the new spot before finally letting go. Then the voice stopped, and I felt it leave. I didn't see it run. I didn't see legs or arms or clothes, but I felt it rush away from me, back through the lounge room, toward the back bedroom with the French doors. It moved fast, like someone sprinting out of a room after a sudden intense moment. The feeling of it got weaker and weaker until it was completely gone. The house fell quiet again. No footsteps, no rattling, no running water. It was over. I stood there, still behind the table, shaking, my arms now slowly lowering from my face. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like it was in my throat. My muscles ached from tensing so hard. I felt rooted to the spot, even though whatever had held me had long since let go. I did the first thing that came to mind. I went for my phone. I pulled it out, my hands fumbling a little, and looked at the screen. The time was 11:13 a.m. That meant everything. The movement, the kitchen sounds, the footsteps, the encounter in the opening, the grabbing, the voice, the retreat, had all happened within a few minutes. It felt like it had lasted much longer, but the clock told me it had been quick. Intense, but quick. I considered calling someone right away, but I didn't even know what I would say. Come home? There's something invisible grabbing me. There's something in the house. I didn't even know where to start. I just stood there with the phone in my hand, staring at the time and trying to slow my breathing down. I didn't see it again after that. The rest of the day passed without any more footsteps, no more rattling glasses, no more running taps. The others came home, and the house filled up again with normal human voices and movement. On the surface, everything went back to normal, but it didn't feel normal to me. Even though that particular presence didn't show itself again, I felt something change in the house. The air seemed heavier, especially in certain rooms. There was a sense of something darker lingering in the background, like a shadow just out of sight. The easy feeling I had when I'd first arrived, like the building was just another ordinary place, was gone. Every time I was alone in the house after that, a different kind of fear washed over me. It wasn't just the fear of seeing something again or feeling something touch me. It was deeper than that. It felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't see. Like if I stayed there too long by myself, I might slip and fall into it. The best way I can describe it is this. Whenever I was alone in the house, I felt like I was about to disappear. It was a strange, creeping feeling, like I might suddenly not be there anymore, not just to other people, but to myself. As if the house, or whatever was now in it, could somehow pull me out of my own life and into a place I wouldn't be able to come back from. It sounds dramatic, but that was the sensation. I felt like if I stayed alone for too long, something might reach for me again. And this time, not just grab my shoulders and move me, but take me somewhere I couldn't reach anyone. So I avoided being alone there as much as I could. If someone was home, I felt safer. When they weren't, I kept myself alert, listening to every sound, watching the light move across the rooms, checking the time more often than usual. I never relaxed fully the way I had before that morning. The building still looked normal. The chair stayed where it was after that, or at least I never noticed it move again. The floorboards still creaked in the usual places when people walked over them. The kitchen still sounded like a normal kitchen when someone ran the tap or opened a cupboard. From the outside, nothing was any different. But I knew something had happened there, something that didn't care whether the building had a history or not. Whatever it was, it had walked past me, moved things, made sounds, grabbed me, spoken in my mind, and then vanished. And even after it was gone, the echo of it stayed behind. When my parents, my younger brother, and I first moved into that house, we honestly believed it was going to be a fresh start. From the outside, it looked completely ordinary. It was the kind of place you would drive past and never think twice about. A neat little yard, a plain front door, a normal street with other normal houses. Nothing about it said haunted or strange or even unusual. It was just a house. That's what we told ourselves. Still, even on that first day, there was something about the place that made my dad a little uneasy. He never said much at first, just small comments here and there. When we were carrying boxes in, I noticed him standing in the hallway for a moment longer than he needed to, just looking around with this tight, uncomfortable expression on his face. When he saw me watching him, he forced a smile and shrugged like he was shaking off a strange thought. Later, he joked that it was probably just the stress of moving and being tired. He tried to dismiss whatever he was feeling and act like it was nothing. We wanted to believe it was nothing, too. The first night we slept there, everything was still half-packed. My room was full of boxes and random piles of clothes. I was trying to arrange things and unpack enough so I could at least find my bed and some basic stuff. The house had that strange smell that new places sometimes have. Not exactly bad, just different. Fresh paint, old dust, and something else I couldn't quite name. I remember standing in my room next to a stack of boxes, deciding where to put my posters, when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the wall beside me, very clear and sharp. I paused, listening. At first I thought maybe it was the pipes or the house just settling, the way people always say old houses do. I waited a few seconds, then went back to what I was doing. Tap, tap, tap. This time it felt a little more deliberate, like someone tapping their fingers against the wall on purpose. I frowned and looked around my room. Nobody was there. The sound wasn't coming from outside either. It was too close. It felt like it was coming from the wall, right next to my head. Trying not to overthink it, I left my room and went to find my mom. She was in the next room, unpacking a box of kitchen stuff and trying to make the house feel more like a home. I told her about the tapping and asked if she could hear it too. She barely even looked up from what she was doing. She shrugged and told me it was probably just the house, that I was tired and my imagination was acting up. Her tone was so casual that I felt a bit stupid for mentioning it, so I laughed it off and told myself I was overreacting. But when I went back to my room, the tapping continued. Not constant, not loud. Just every few minutes, that same soft, clear pattern. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't enough to prove anything. It was just enough to make me feel slightly unsettled, like there was something just out of sight that I couldn't quite understand. For the next few nights, nothing major happened. The house felt calm enough. We were all busy unpacking, organizing, and trying to fit our old lives into this new space. Boxes disappeared, cupboards filled up. Slowly, the house began to look like our home. I almost forgot about the tapping. Almost. Then my younger brother started screaming in the middle of the night. It was sudden and sharp, the kind of scream that makes your heart jump into your throat before you're even properly awake. I jolted out of bed, my mind racing. I thought maybe he'd had a nightmare or was sick. I rushed out into the hallway, my feet cold against the floor, and went straight to his room. The moment I stepped through his doorway, I knew something was wrong. The temperature dropped like I had just walked into a freezer. My skin prickled instantly. The air in his room was so cold it felt almost solid, like it was pressing against my face and arms. It didn't match the rest of the house at all. Outside his room, the air had been normal. Inside, it felt like a different place entirely. Then I noticed the smell. It was strange and hard to describe. Not rotten or dirty, but sharp, almost spicy. It reminded me of some sort of strong incense or herbs burning, but there was no smoke, no candle, nothing that could have caused it. I just stood there in the doorway, breathing in that odd scent and feeling the cold sink into my bones. My brother was shaking in his bed, wide-eyed and terrified. He kept saying something had been in his room, but his words were jumbled, and he was still half crying. I tried to calm him down, but even I felt nervous. I believed in the paranormal, and I knew enough about ghosts and hauntings to recognize some of the signs. Cold spots, strange smells, sudden fear. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but everything about that room in that moment felt wrong. I went to get my mom. She came to his room, annoyed and tired, her hair messy from being woken up. I tried to explain about the cold and the strange smell, but she brushed it all aside. Once again, she told me it was just my imagination. She said my brother probably had a nightmare, and that I was making it worse by overreacting. She tucked my brother back into his bed, spoke to him softly until he stopped crying, and sent me back to my own room. I went, but I didn't feel reassured. Even as I walked away, I could still feel that icy chill clinging to my skin and that strange, spicy scent lingering in my nose. Part of me wanted to argue with her, but another part just felt tired. It was easier to pretend that we were all fine. Several days passed without anything dramatic happening. The tapping still came and went, especially at night when the house was quiet. But Mum and Dad didn't want to hear about it. My brother seemed calmer, so I tried to let it go. Then one of my friends came over for a sleepover, and things took another turn. We set up mattresses in my room and stayed up late talking about school, plans, boys, and random things like we always did. Eventually, we both drifted off to sleep. Sometime in the middle of the night, my friend woke up. Later, she would tell me exactly what she felt and saw. She said the first thing she noticed was the feeling of something jumping onto the bed. Not lightly either. It was the clear, solid sensation of an animal landing near her feet and moving slightly, the way a cat might jump up to curl beside you. Our problem was, we didn't have a cat. We didn't have any pets in the house at all. Half asleep and confused, she rolled over to face the side of the bed where I was sleeping, thinking maybe I had moved, or maybe she was just imagining it. That was when she saw it. Standing over me was a tall, dark figure. It wasn't just a shadow. It had shape and height. She told me it was large, towering over the bed, silently leaning over where I lay asleep. She couldn't make out a face clearly, only the outline of shoulders and a head. It felt like it was staring at me, watching me. Panic washed over her. She tried to call my name, to shout, to shake me awake, but nothing came out at first. Her body felt heavy, like fear had pinned her down. Finally, she managed to move enough to reach over and grab my arm, shaking me hard. By the time my eyes opened and I sat up, the figure was gone. She was shaking as she told me what she had seen, her voice breathless and unsteady. I tried to stay calm, but my insides twisted with fear and a horrible, cold understanding. Whatever was in the house wasn't just tapping walls or moving through rooms. It had been standing right over me while I slept. Around this time, my dad started to speak up more about his own experiences. One evening, while we were all sitting at the table, he mentioned, almost casually,
that he had heard voices the night before. Not just vague murmurs, but the distinct sound of 3 different people arguing in the lounge room. He said he heard them clearly enough to make out that it was an argument, but not clearly enough to understand the words. Thinking it might have been a TV left on, or maybe someone outside, he got up to check. When he walked into the lounge room, the voices stopped. The room was empty. The TV was off. No outside noise filtered through the windows. It was completely quiet. My dad already believed in the paranormal. He wasn't the type to deny what he felt or heard. After that night, he stopped trying to pretend everything was normal. He told us plainly that he thought there was something in the house. From that moment on, the activity in the house seemed to increase. Little things started going missing. A set of keys, a piece of jewelry, a small toy, a remote, a wallet. Items we used every day would suddenly not be where we left them. At first we blamed each other, assumed someone had moved them and forgotten. We turned rooms upside down looking for them. We checked behind couches, under beds, inside drawers. Most of the time we found nothing. Then, after a few days, the missing item would just reappear. But it wouldn't be back in its original place. It wouldn't be in a logical spot. It would simply show up in the most obvious, unavoidable location, the middle of the hallway. The house had a long hallway that connected most of the rooms, and more than once, we would find something that had been missing for days, lying right there in the center, as if someone had carefully placed it there for us to see. You couldn't miss it. You'd come around the corner, and there it would be, sitting on the floor like a message. It got to the point where every time something went missing, we would half joke, half complain that the house would give it back later. But there was nothing funny about the feeling of being played
with by something unseen. For a long time, my mum didn't share much about what she experienced. She kept brushing off my stories and my brother's fear, acting like she didn't believe in any of it. She wanted everything to have a normal explanation. She wanted to keep us calm. Or maybe she was trying to keep herself calm. It wasn't until much later that she finally told us what had happened to her one night. She had been asleep in her bed, with my dad next to her, when she was woken by a light tapping. It was happening right near her, not on the wall or outside, but on the mattress itself. Tap, tap, tap. It felt like someone was gently drumming their fingers on the bed right beside her. At first, she thought it might be my dad moving or adjusting his position, but when she turned her head, he was fast asleep, facing the other way. The tapping continued. Curious and uneasy, she turned further, looking down toward the edge of the bed. That was when she saw it. Hovering over her was a figure dressed in a long dress. The fabric seemed old-fashioned, not like something you'd see people wear today. The dress hung down in long folds, and the figure's presence filled the space above her like a heavy shadow. The worst part was the face. Mom said it was distorted, twisted in a way that didn't seem natural. The features were wrong, blurred, and stretched, like something had pulled at them from the inside. It didn't look fully human, but it also wasn't something she could easily compare to anything else. It was just wrong. Instinctively, she tried to scream. She opened her mouth and pulled in a breath, ready to shout and wake my dad to get this thing away from her. But instead of hearing her own scream, she felt it being pulled away from her. She said it was as if the being absorbed the sound right out of her mouth, swallowing the scream before it could leave her throat. Then, instead of her voice, the figure let out a scream of its own. It was loud and sharp and full of something that wasn't human anger or fear, but something deeper and stranger. It was her scream thrown back at her in a new and terrifying form, like the thing had taken it and twisted it, then hurled it back into the room. The whole experience shattered any sense of safety she had left in that house. She kept it to herself for a long time, not wanting to scare us even more, but it stayed with her. It was one of the reasons she finally agreed that we needed to leave. Eventually, we did move out. My dad had grown up in a haunted house himself, and he had no desire to put us through years of that kind of fear. He didn't want his children to wake up to strange smells, freezing rooms, tall figures standing over their beds, and distorted faces hovering in the dark. As soon as we had the chance, we left that house behind and found somewhere else to live. For us, life calmed down again. The strange activity stopped. No more tapping on walls. No more missing objects reappearing in hallways. No more arguments in the lounge with invisible people, or strange figures in long dresses, stealing screams. We were able to sleep without expecting something to be standing at the foot of the bed. The silence in the new house felt like a blessing. But that house we left behind wasn't done. We had been close with our next-door neighbors during the time we lived there, and even after we moved away, we kept in touch and went back for parties and visits. Because of that, we got to meet the new tenants who moved into our old house. They were normal people like us, just another family looking for a place to live. For a while, they didn't say much. Then, slowly, they began to talk about some of the things they were experiencing. They told us the walls would be tapped on at night, always when everything was quiet. They said they heard disembodied voices calling their names from empty rooms. They talked about shadowy figures they would see out of the corner of their eyes, flitting quickly from one part of the house to another, always just out of clear view. As they listed their experiences, my family and I exchanged looks. It was like listening to someone read out loud from our own memories. We realized pretty quickly that what had happened to us was not just our imagination and not just a phase the house had gone through. Whatever was there had stayed. We eventually told them some of what we had been through. We didn't want to scare them more than they already were, but it felt wrong not to be honest. After hearing our stories and comparing them to their own, they decided they didn't want to stay. Not long after that conversation, they moved out. Over time, other families moved in. Then they moved out. Then new people moved in again. And then they left too. I still keep an eye on that house whenever I pass by the street. I notice how often the curtains change, how often new cars appear and disappear from the driveway. It's almost become a pattern now. People move in, stay for a while, and then they leave. From the outside, it still looks perfectly normal. Just another house on an ordinary street. But I know better now. I've seen what happens inside. I've heard the tapping, felt the cold, smelled the strange scent, watched objects vanish and return, and listened to what other people have gone through there. Whatever lives in that house seems determined to stay. And even though we don't live there anymore, a part of me never quite forgot what it felt like to fall asleep in that place, wondering what might be standing over me in the dark.
I have spent so many evenings trying to figure out why strange things seem to drift toward me, the way campfire smoke drifts toward the one person who hates the smell most. Maybe it is some unknown kink in my luck, or maybe it is just that I pay too much attention to details other folks ignore. But since childhood, I have wandered into more eerie situations than feels fair. My earliest memories include odd shadows flitting between trees, footprints that appeared overnight in fresh snow and vanished in a single line into the untouched woods, and voices murmuring under the wind when no one else was around to speak. Most incidents were small enough that I could convince myself they were tricks of light or a kid's overactive imagination. Still, they etched deep grooves in the way I look at the world. A lifetime of half-glimpses trained me to sense when the ordinary starts tilting just a little too far from normal. Last spring, 3 friends and I decided to take a long-planned road trip through New Jersey. The original idea was simple: spend 3 days backpacking and camping along a well-marked trail, and then drive straight to the shore for saltwater, thrift store arcades, and greasy boardwalk pizza. We wanted equal parts quiet nights under stars and gaudy summer lights clanging against darkness. Something to feed every mood that lives inside a group of 20-something friends who still believe every mile holds a new story. We chose early May, partly because the weather is forgiving and partly because hordes of summer tourists have not yet clogged every parking lot. Soft air, new leaves glowing bright, streams running high and cold with spring melt. That is the setup everyone imagines when they picture a perfect multi-day hike. Our little crew was 4 deep. Theo, my oldest friend, tends to see the world as one big practical joke, and if he can pull the punchline on you, he considers the day a win. Miguel, by contrast, is all careful planning and constant checking. Did we pack enough stove fuel? Did we double tie the bear bag? Did we plot a bailout trail if someone twists an ankle? Then there's Jen, whose spirit hovers halfway between Theo's mischief and Miguel's pragmatism. She cracks dry one-liners when tension climbs too high, yet keeps a precise mental map of every turn we take. And me, who grew up wandering hardwood ridges, feet toughened by years of clambering over mossy rocks, so comfortable, moving through dark tree lines that my parents joked I was born feral. I sometimes feel responsible for shepherding my more anxious companions through terrain that never unnerves me, until it suddenly does. We parked at a small lot beside the trailhead just before lunch on a bright Thursday. Giant tulip poplars towered over the kiosk where a faded map showed loops and spurs in multicolored ink. We shouldered packs, tightened straps, and stepped under green canopy. The path was forgiving, a gentle roller coaster over knobby hills, tracing creeks that flashed silver in the sun. We hiked only 4 miles that first afternoon because Miguel insisted we settle early and guarantee enough light to pitch tents properly. Our plan was to camp just far enough off trail to feel alone, yet close enough that if anything went wrong, we could step back onto the beaten track quickly. Theo joked that Miguel must secretly want cell signal. Miguel ignored him and kept counting strides. We found a moss-soft clearing that checked every box: flat ground, thick leaf litter, a ring of saplings at the perimeter tall enough to break wind, but thin enough to watch a full moon rise. A shallow brook lay a stone's throw down the hill, gurgling through pebbles clear as bottled water. Behind camp, slope climbed toward older growth, where wide trunks blocked most underbrush, and the forest floor looked swept clean by decades of leaf loam. It was a place that felt safe, the way any place can feel safe in twilight before unknown darkness. We dropped the packs, shrugged out sleeping bags, staked 2 small ultralight tents side by side. Jen gathered wrist-thick fallen branches to build a cooking fire in the tidy metal pan we always carry to protect duff from stray embers. Dinner was simple: thick sausages seared over coals until their skins crackled, tortillas warmed on the pan, marshmallows skewered on twigs until they oozed. Overhead, the sky deepened from forget-me-not blue to navy, and every gap between branches brightened with slow-kindling stars. We told stories, laughed loud, and let the fire sink into a quiet cradle of red heat before dousing it with brook water. Night belonged to all 4 of us in the gentle way ordinary nights do, filling lungs with cool air and minds with sleep easy to chase. Morning spilled gold across leaves and everything felt right. We boiled oatmeal, filtered water, repacked, and followed trail for another leisurely stretch. By noon, we stopped at a broad quartz outcrop where warm stone invited bare feet and peanut butter tortillas. Laughing and content, we hiked back nearly to the area of our first camp, then angled down a side route Miguel had studied online. He assured us this spur created a compact loop, bringing us back to the main path after only 3 miles and offering new scenery along a small pond ringed by cattails. Theo grumbled about retracing ground. I shrugged. Fresh ground or not, forest never looks the same twice. Jen mentioned that the spur lay closer to a patch of private land, but still sat inside boundaries that permitted camping. We agreed to settle near the pond, though maybe not directly on its edge, because insect armies love still water. Long shadows stretched by the time we found a gentle knoll dotted with mountain laurel blossoms. Another perfect site, we told ourselves. We pitched the same 2 tents, spaced just enough so whispered jokes
could carry if someone needed to poke fun at Theo's snoring. After Ziti warmed on the stove and easy laughter drifted into the hush of evening, we climbed inside nylon. Overlapping conversations slowed to yawns. Zippers drew closed, night swallowed sighs. First day had been textbook, second day equally smooth. What could possibly go awry? A few hours later, I blinked awake needing to pee, an inevitable side effect of downing 2 cups of cocoa before crawling into my bag. Sliding from the tent was second nature. I tugged bare feet into trail shoes, shrugged on a fleece, and slipped away from the tents, careful not to shine my headlamp into sleeping faces. The night air tasted faintly sweet. A waning moon peeked through ragged clouds, enough to navigate. I padded downhill, putting maybe 2 minutes of distance between me and camp, because Theo had threatened juvenile pranks if anyone urinated too near him. That far out, I found a patch of ferns and sighed relief as the stream of bladder pressure hit soil. A whisper of wind roamed the understory. A single swirl, not a breeze that moved treetops, just a low hush circling near ground level. Then everything went still. Not quiet like most people describe quiet. I mean the bruised hush that presses on eardrums, smothers breath, and drains each noise you expect to hear from living woods. No katydids, no distant owl, no crackling twig under raccoon feet. My pulse clicked louder than any external sound. I knew that silence. It is the forest's taut string before a predator steps into view, the hush that even cicadas respect. Air cooled abruptly at my exposed forearms, an unnatural temperature plunge that felt like stepping from summer into a walk-in freezer. I zipped up my fleece halfway and scanned treeline. Leaf litter lay smooth. Moonlight slanted long through laurel branches. Nothing moved, but something watched. I could feel intent, like the brief second you lock eyes with a stranger on a subway and realize they have studied you far longer than politeness allows. A second later, wind rushed against my left side. It came as a single blast, strong enough to bend knee-high stems flat and flap my fleece hem like a sail. It carried a moist heat, contrary to the chill around it, and in that rush I heard an unmistakable exhalation, one wet, cavernous breath pushed out by huge lungs. Imagine standing next to the vent of an industrial blower and hearing it sigh. The exhale brushed my skin from shoulder to hip. I jerked sideways, pants half-buttoned, suddenly exposed and ridiculously vulnerable. My eyes searched for a shape, but found only black space between trunks. Fighting the urge to sprint, I fastened my belt, turned uphill, and trotted. Controlled, preserving dignity though dread prickled down my spine. The 2 minutes back to camp. I crested the little ridge and saw 3 silhouettes near the dormant fire ring, backlit by the low ember glow my friends had banked earlier. They were standing rather than sleeping. Theo's headlamp bobbed weakly, pointed downhill. Jen held her phone like a useless shield. Miguel seemed frozen entirely. As soon as they saw me, relief broke across their faces, but none spoke. I asked what was wrong. Jen's voice shook. What happened down there? Everything just went dead. She waved one arm at the black hush still blanketing tree trunks. Theo, usually mouthy, simply nodded. Even Miguel's spreadsheets and contingency plans held no entry for a forest gone mute in the space of a single breath. We stood together, letting adrenaline leak from our fingers. Slowly, chirps resumed. A single cricket here, a rustle of leaves there. Normal night sounds regained footing. Theo forced a joke about cosmic mute buttons. We laughed a little. the thin, brittle laugh of people sanding edges off fear. Eventually, we crawled back into tents. Remarkably, steady rain pattered onto rainflies an hour later, and the soft rhythm lulled us until sunrise. We spent daylight of the third morning ignoring conversation about the hush. Nobody liked the vulnerability anchored behind that story. Nobody wanted to own the fear. We decided to explore meadow pockets near the pond for the last half day before packing back to the trailhead. Afternoon light slid behind slate-colored clouds, and a breeze rippled pond grass like a restless hand brushing shag carpet. When drizzle thickened to persistent rainfall, we retreated to camp, cooked instant ramen under a tarp, and debated leaving at dawn instead of midday so we could make good time to the coast. Rain eventually tapered. Heavy, sodden air cooled, but still felt comfortable enough for sleeping. We banked the fire to glowing coals and doused every ember at the edges. Gray smoke coiled upward, dispersed in wind. Jen and Miguel climbed into one tent, Theo and I into the other. We unzipped sleeping bag hoods just enough to breathe and joked about whether Jersey Beach pizza could compete with Brooklyn slices. Conversation faded by stages, Theo's voice drifting into murmurs, my replies trailing off mid-sentence, and then the hush of deep sleep. Sometime later I felt a hand shake my shoulder. Theo crouched beside me, finger pressed to lips. "Listen," he whispered. I held breath and heard it, heavy footsteps patting damp ground outside nylon. Weighty, deliberate. Each step crushed sticks with a pop, not splintery like dry twigs but thick, like wet branches under heel. A low sucking noise followed each footfall as the ground released. Someone large circled. Theo, eyes wide, lifted the zipper an inch. I wanted to punch him for inviting cold and potential danger, but the opening offered an unintentionally perfect keyhole to the scene beyond. Moist air fogged between us, complicating the view. I glimpsed no flashlight beam, no headlamp glow, just a faint smear of moon breaking, thin clouds enough to silhouette trunks. Visibility crept maybe 15 feet. My stomach flipped, hoping the walker stayed farther away. Theo peered stiff, then slid back abruptly so fast he nearly toppled onto me. His face blanched. "What is it?" I mouthed. He swallowed audibly. "Horse," he said, voice barely audible. "Except," he shivered, "except standing like a person." My brain processed image fragments. Horse? Dirt trail? Some farmer's lost colt wandered near camp? But a colt would wear a bell or halter, or at least make clopping noises. Footfalls I'd heard were not hooves on rock. They were soft, wet, squelching. I had to see. Against every instinct I pinched zipper, lowered it slowly, and pushed nose to the crack. Moon broke free, brightening ground like a faded flashlight. 10 feet away a figure towered, too tall, too broad at shoulders. My eyes flicked from hooves, yes, unmistakably hard, cloven hooves balanced on muscular fur-matted legs, up past knees shaped wrong, joint bending slightly backward to thighs thick with sinew and hair. The torso almost resembled a man's, narrow waist, barrel chest, except dark fur veiled everything, glistening damp. Arms bulged unnatural with muscle, hanging low, ending in hands wide as shovel blades. Each of its 5 fingers curved into claws bright as obsidian. Spreading behind those shoulders were wings, enormous black canvases ribbed with bone struts, half-folded yet still spanning the distance across both our tents, casting shadows even with faint moonlight. My breath stuck to ribs, and then the face. It protruded into a muzzle reminiscent of a horse, but skin drew taut around eyes burning amber. Too intelligent, too aware. Jagged ridges ridiculed where nostrils should flare. The mouth formed not a snarl but a crooked grin, the expression of a thing amused to meet prey parted from herd. Its chest rose slowly, fell, exhalation rumbling low. We stilled prey hoping predator loses interest. Instead, the creature met my gaze directly. The look was impossible, like peering into speaking eyes carved inside a nightmare of myth. Time froze. We stared. Maybe 20 seconds, maybe life measured in heartbeats, hammered against eardrums. In those seconds, I thought absurdly about state legends of the Jersey Devil. Mother Leeds and her 13th cursed child, birthed in 1735 before sprouting wings and fleeing up the chimney. I had always filed the story next to the Tooth Fairy, yet right then folklore crouched living and breathing outside ripstop nylon. Behind us, Miguel's tent unzipped with violent speed, and he crashed out, saw the creature and screamed, a raw, primal bleat. The sound snapped reality. The creature jerked its head, snorted, then sprang not forward but upward, using hind legs in a forceful leap that almost resembled a skipping motion. Wings unfolded full and beat once, twice, stirring wind that slapped tents. It vanished between trunks, hooves drumming wet earth in bounding strides until thuds dissolved into forest distance. Silence ensued again, but this silence buzzed with pumping blood, not eerie calm. Theo and I exploded out of the tent. Jen stood barefoot beside Miguel, mouth open. Theo shouted to grab packs. I yanked zipper lower, nearly ripping teeth, and started stuffing gear. Jen insisted only essentials mattered. Miguel shook so hard he dropped his headlamp twice. We smothered embers under sand and splashed water even though no coals remained. Less than 10 minutes later, we half ran, half stumbled onto the main trail, heavy packs flapping loose straps. Rainfly fabric slithered behind Theo. He had forgotten to fold it. Nobody would retrieve it. Darkness swallowed trail edges. Branches reached overhead like barbed wire. We kept a brisk, nearly jogging pace and did not talk. Only one mantra each. Move. Move. Adrenaline carved an hour into a blur. Eventually, highway noise seeped faint from far valley, and we spotted a reflective sliver off asphalt. The empty parking lot glimmered spectral under sodium lamps. Keys rattled, doors slammed, engine roared. Not until miles of highway rolled under tires did we speak beyond clipped commands. Keep going, watch for deer. Then a dam burst, everyone talking at once. What was that thing? Did you see claws? Wings that big don't belong to any living bird? Maybe a prank? We choked on half sentences and allergic terror, scratchy in throats. At a gas station along the freeway, we toppled from the car and leaned against dented fenders until stomachs stopped spinning. Sunrise found us at a diner 2 towns over, nursing coffee now cold, plates of untouched pancakes congealing syrup. A TV droned above the counter about shore traffic, kids' soccer scores, anything but devils. None of us could summon appetite. The plan for boardwalk rides in ocean sun melted. Theo suggested driving home. No one argued. Days later, after sleep loosened nerves and the normal hum of daily life disguised memory, I browsed folklore archives online. From Lenape legends to 1700s pamphlets blaming storms on demon offspring, the descriptions rang unnervingly familiar. Horse-like head, cloven hooves, bat wings, predatory shriek. Wildlife experts might claim sandhill cranes wearing mud create illusions. Skeptics list escaped exotic animals. Others propose misidentified albino deer. Yet hooves plus wings plus muscled arms and claws do not match any crane or deer or household pet. Myth, straw men, retelling aside, I know what 4 sets of eyes saw under a dappled moon inside a forest gone deathly still. I cannot claim universal truth about the Jersey Devil. Maybe some night superstition condenses from swamp mists to wear flesh and remind intruders that humans hold no monopoly on fear. Maybe an undiscovered species glides the Pine Barrens, surfacing only in quiet decades and then sinking again. Or maybe myths, when fed centuries of belief, gather enough weight to step out of story and breathe. What matters to me is simple memory. A hush that shoved every forest sound away, a blast of wind shaped like a monstrous sigh, and a creature's intelligent eyes meeting mine from mere feet away. Those sensations remain chemical in my bones. We still hike, though we stick to busier parks where campgrounds rest inside loops of ranger patrol roads. We still roast marshmallows, though I watch tree lines the entire time, listening for unnatural silence. When someone jokes about the Jersey Devil now, I manage a tense smile and change the subject. A tale ceases to be a tale once you smell wet fur and feel earth tremble under hooves skipping across leaf mold. If you camp in those woods, remember the quiet can signal more than sleep. If wind whooshes from nowhere and cold suddenly gnaws your skin, breathe slow, pack calm, watch for shadows the size of nightmares, and never assume myths die in old pamphlets. Some myths still wander, amused by the tremor in your voice, and they do not tire of reminding you. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I pulled into John's gravel driveway a little after 10:30 on the night of May 19th, 2015, not expecting anything more than an ordinary reunion. I lived down in Louisiana then, 5 hours of interstate and dark back roads away from John's small house in rural Arkansas, and I had not seen him in almost 2 years. Back in school, we had been glued together every weekend, fishing in the river bottoms, camping on hillside clearings, wandering dead-end dirt tracks just to see what lay beyond the last gate. But adulthood had stretched time thin. After months of missed calls and rain-checked plans, I decided to surprise him on one of my vacation days. I figured I would find him in good spirits, pour him a cold beer from the cooler in my truck, swap stories until dawn, and pretend nothing in our friendship had changed. The house was dark when I arrived. Porch light burned, but no truck sat beside the shed, and no music drifted from the living room windows the way it often did. I shrugged the feeling off. John was a forest ranger with an unpredictable schedule, and sometimes wildfire assessments or nighttime search and rescue drills kept him out late. I parked my little Ford Ranger at the edge of the crushed stone pad, killed the engine, and spent half an hour sitting on the tailgate under star-soaked sky, letting cool air nudge road dust from the cuffs of my jeans. Crickets sang by thousands, and a faraway owl called across the field. Everything smelled like summer coming early: cut grass, faint honeysuckle, a trace of turned earth from the neighbor's garden. Headlights soon swept the fence line. John's county-issued pickup rolled into sight, a dull gray Chevy with mud spattered to the fender flares. He eased up beside me and let the engine idle a moment longer than necessary. I waited, smiling, ready to spring the surprise the second his boots hit gravel. But the driver's door stayed shut. High beams clicked off. The cab interior glowed dimly. Through the glass, I saw John's shoulders slumped, head bowed, hands gripping the wheel as if it anchored him to the earth. At first, I thought he was fiddling with the ignition or scrolling messages on his phone. Then he pressed the heel of one palm against his cheek, and his broad shoulders shook. Light caught a streak on his face, tears. Another second passed before I noticed empty miniature whiskey bottles scattered on the passenger seat, their brown glass glinting like spent cartridges. The air smelled of something sharp and sweet, even through the half-open window. I climbed off the tailgate and stepped to his door. The hinge creaked when I pulled the handle. "John, hey man, it's Ryan," I said, leaning close. His eyes were red, unfocused, as though he had sprinted through a storm of dust. For a heartbeat, he looked straight through me, confused. I put a hand on his shoulder, and he jolted as if the touch burned. He had never flinched from anything in his life. 6'5", built thick with muscle from hauling blow-down timber and lugging firefighting packs, John had always been the friend who rushed first into whatever tight spot needed courage. Seeing him recoil felt like stepping into a house where gravity ran the wrong direction. "It's all right," I said, voice low. "You're home. Let's get inside." He opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words emerged, just a dry rasp and another ragged breath. When he tried to stand, his knees folded. I slipped an arm around his back, hauled him upright, and guided him toward the porch steps. He smelled of alcohol, sweat, and something metallic, almost like the faint odor that lingers near welding sparks. Inside the front room, I steered him to the sofa. He collapsed onto the cushions, hands resting limp on his thighs, eyes fixed on a point far past the opposite wall. "John, what happened?" I asked. He said nothing. White lamplight showed his face drained of color, the skin waxy, eyes ringed with dark half-moons. That look reminded me of old war photos, soldiers stunned by shellfire, mine still hearing blasts long after the guns fell silent. 2 minutes stretched. I started to worry he might be slipping toward dangerous shock. Then, without warning, he surged up, wrapped both arms around me, and clung tight, breath hitching. "You don't know how good it is to see you, brother," he whispered. His voice cracked on the final word. We had grown up side by side, back when a walk in the woods felt like striding through our own personal kingdom. All those memories rushed into that fierce grip, climbing maples to spy on neighbors' ponies, night fishing with cheap flashlights, daring each other to camp miles from home with nothing but pocket knives and stubborn confidence. I held him until his shaking eased. Then he stepped back, wiped his eyes with the heel of a calloused hand, and walked to the kitchen freezer. He pulled out a half-empty bottle of whiskey, poured 2 glasses, hands trembling so badly amber liquid sloshed onto the counter. Maybe slow down, I suggested, as he pushed one tumbler into my palm. He grunted something like agreement, but raised his own glass and drained it in a single swallow. He poured another. Only then, with alcohol glossing his nerves, did words start to climb out of him. "There's something wrong in those woods," he said. Even half slurred, the sentence carried weight like an anvil. "Today, we found a body." Finding hikers who lost their way or fell from cliffs was part of a ranger's grim routine. Yet John had always spoken of those recoveries with somber steadiness, never with the raw terror now edging each syllable. I set my untouched glass on the coffee table and urged him to start at the beginning, from the morning before the world went sideways. He closed his eyes, took a breath, and forced himself back along the timeline. Mid-afternoon, we got a radio call from a woman. Panic in her voice said her husband disappeared on one of the remote spurs near Devil's Hollow. They'd been hiking a couple hours. He stepped off to take a leak, didn't come back. She went in after him, found blood, called us. John paused long enough to swallow more whiskey. I winced. He went on. My partner Bill and I loaded gear, trauma kit, radios, mag lights, field weapons, and drove out. Sunlight was already fading behind the ridge. The GPS tag she dropped guided us close. Her tracks were easy to follow, but his were scattered. Only took us 10 minutes to find the first piece. John's voice dropped to a whisper. It was his arm. My stomach nodded. John pressed fingers to his temples, digging nails into skin as if to dislodge the image. We kept going. Blood trail led deeper, maybe another 50 yards. Then we found the rest. He lifted his glass, but realized it was empty. He did not pour. He stared at the carpet as words trickled. I heard wet tearing before I saw it. Something crouched over him, ripping off meat, chewing, shined my light full on it. Should have run. What did it look like? I asked. He met my eyes. His pupils were tiny pinpricks in pools of blue. Tall, taller than me, skin stretched tight, pale gray like it hurt. It was so thin I could count ribs under the hide. And its face? His voice faltered. Left side had one giant eye, no white, just shiny black. The right side, nothing. Scar tissue maybe, mouth open like a flower. Petals ringed with teeth, rose laid back like shark jaws. When it hissed, the petals vibrated, made a clicking noise, insect-like. A chill climbed my spine despite the warm house. John lit a cigarette, dragged smoke deep enough to steady his shaking, and continued. Bill froze. I drew my sidearm, a .45, centered mass, fired. It rocked back, howled, but didn't drop. I emptied the mag. Blood splattered, black or dark red, couldn't tell in flashlight glare. Thing shook itself, like the hits were bee stings. I turned. Bill was already sprinting. We ran. Never ran that hard. Expected claws in my back every step, but nothing chased. Made it to the truck, radioed state police, then waited face down on the floor until sirens arrived. He fell silent. Cigarette ash trembled at the tip. I tried to process the description. Thin, 7 feet, single black eye, mouth like a blooming carnivorous plant. Hollywood's worst monsters felt tame beside that. What did the police say? I asked. They took statements, told us shock makes minds play tricks. John laughed once, harsh. But one deputy pulled me aside, said some things in these mountains better left to them. Forget what you saw, he told me. Stay out of Devil's Hollow after dark. We sat a long time without words, the ticking wall clock too loud. Eventually, John stubbed his cigarette, down to swallow straight from the whiskey bottle, and announced he was going to bed. He hugged me again, with the desperate gratitude of a drowning man clinging to driftwood, then lumbered down the hallway. The door clicked shut. I stood alone beside the cold hearth, holding on to questions that wouldn't settle. Sleep refused to claim me that night. I lay on the spare couch, staring at the ceiling fan turning lazy half circles, mind replaying John's broken narrative. Somewhere in the oak woods south of Devil's Hollow, a creature with a single void black eye and a blossom mouth still prowled. And the local authorities seemed to know it. Morning light seeped around blinds, pale and weak. John shuffled into the kitchen around 7, skin still gray but sober enough to wince at the headache hammering behind his eyes. I brewed coffee while he sat motionless at the table. Neither of us spoke until steam rose from our mugs. You quitting? I asked quietly. John nodded. Night duty at least, he whispered. Maybe all of it. He rubbed the back of his neck. But there's paperwork first. Need to go in today. Not alone, I said. I'm coming. He looked ready to argue, but fatigue diluted protest. The ranger headquarters was a low cinder block building near the eastern park gate, dull green paint peeling where storms had sandblasted over decades. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed and maps cluttered corkboards. Bill sat at a desk near the radio tower, eyes hollow. He nodded at us but said nothing. The district captain, a broad woman with graying braid and eyes sharp as hawk talons, summoned John to her office. I waited on a vinyl chair outside, listening to muffled voices. 20 minutes passed. John emerged, cheeks flushed, jaw clenched. He pointed his chin toward the door. I followed. Captain Avery closed the door behind us, leaned on the desk and studied me. "Ryan, is it? John's childhood friend?" "Yes, ma'am." She exhaled through her nose. I read the incident reports. Strange details. But the state will list the cause of death as animal predation, likely black bear. "You know that's wrong," John said, voice low. She held his gaze. "I know what is useful to write and what is not. Tourists hear bear and think manageable. Carry spray, make noise. They hear monster. They stop coming, funding dries, everything collapses." She turned to the window where pine shadows slid across cracked pavement. "But I'll say this much, you two stay out of Hollow for a while. If something comes across the line into populated areas, game and fish will handle. Until then, leave it." John opened his mouth, then shut it. Avery nodded dismissal. We left without shaking hands. Back at John's house, we packed his essentials, clothes, framed photographs, field journal notebooks, and loaded them into my truck. He would take unpaid leave, maybe transfer states once paperwork cleared. I convinced him to spend a few weeks in Louisiana, decompress, decide future steps without forest shadows over his shoulder. By late afternoon, we hit the highway. As miles unwound behind us, John dozed fitfully. I drove silent, eyes flicking to the rearview mirror more than necessary. Each time headlights of a following car glared, the memory of that single black eye surfaced, reflecting my own fear back at me. I told myself the creature belonged to remote ravines far north. But I could not forget the deputy's quiet warning or the captain's careful phrasing. Some horrors do not respect boundaries. More than a year has passed. John never went back. He lives near Baton Rouge now, sells outdoor gear, and limits his camping to crowded state park lots where children ride bicycles between tents. Some nights he still jolts awake drenched in sweat, convinced a flower-toothed mouth hovers inches from his face. I moved apartments, but every few weeks he stays over. We sit on my tiny balcony, share silent beers, and let city noise push wood sounds out of hearing range. Sometimes questions bubble up anyway. Why did the creature only watch after John emptied a magazine into its chest? Why did it not pursue? Did the gunfire hurt it enough? Or did something unseen hold it back near the edge of civilization? Territory, habit, older laws. There is one question we do not voice, though the weight of it presses both our chests. If that thing reeks of impossible hunger, how many lost hikers over decades fed its midnight meals? Official wildlife reports list missing persons in single digits. Locals whisper higher counts. Names vanish, absorbed by a wilderness that keeps secrets better than any silent partner. I think about that one black eye often. How much did it see that night? A blinking flashlight's jitter? 2 trembling men? Terror raw as exposed nerve. Did it judge them insignificant? Did it mark them? Did it know John would abandon the forest afterward, leaving territory uncontested? Maybe its stillness was satisfaction, the solace of a hunter who no longer needs to chase because prey ran itself out. I keep telling myself the mind can concoct horrors from scraps, animal remains, moonlight illusions, adrenaline distortions. Yet I keep remembering the tremor in John's fists, the smell of whiskey at 11:20 when he stared through me as if watching something trailing behind my shoulders. The thought refuses to leave. If truth hides behind official lines and officers warn silence, there must be a reason they fear words as much as claws. One day I might drive the long road back, parked by John's old driveway, and walk to the edge of Devil's Hollow, not as teenager chasing thrills, but as a grown man asking questions. I imagine standing under those pines at dusk, listening for insect click vowels curling through brush. But I also imagine what happens if that single eye swivels from shadow and pins me in place, while a petaled mouth unfurls to greet me. That image turns certainty thin. For now, I let the mystery stay caged in memory. bound by miles of asphalt and the fragile belief that some borders still matter. John says knowledge is useless if it cannot keep him safe. Maybe he is right. Maybe all we can do is warn anyone who laces boots and steps beyond trail markers at twilight. The woods are older than your courage and hungrier than your fear. Walk loud, carry steel, trust silence, least of all, and if you meet something that shouldn't exist, run until dawn finds you, or pray whatever watches decides tonight you are not worth the chase. I was 16 the summer our youth club held its 2-week camp up in the old mountains, and even now, years later, with rent to pay and gray already showing at my temples, I can close my eyes and feel the night air from that place slide cold and thin across my skin. I had grown up in small towns where the hills rose blue on every horizon, so mountains were nothing new to me, but those ridges felt different. Older? Rockier, full of dark folds that hid more secrets than a whole shelf of ghost story paperbacks. We were 17 teenagers, 9 boys, 8 girls, and 4 adult leaders called head boys and head girls, though everyone knew they were barely out of college themselves. We rode up in a rattling bus, windows streaked with dust, knees bumping against backpacks. The camp had once been a logging outpost decades earlier. All that remained were 4 weather-worn cottages, 2 timber stables, a tangle of rusted fences, and a sagging barn that doubled as equipment shed and bad-weather dining hall. A dirt road climbed 3 slow switchbacks to reach the clearing. Beyond those tight loops, the forest pressed in thick, a ragged wall of spruce, fir, and birch, tucked shoulder to shoulder the way children crowd together for a photograph they don't want to sit still for. The camp kept a handful of half-tame animals for the experience. 1 velvet-eared deer rescued as a fawn, a wolf hybrid that was supposed to teach us about conservation, 2 broad-backed horses gentle enough to carry beginners, and several scattered game birds housed in wooden coops that looked too flimsy to stop a determined fox. A barbed wire fence, leaning in places, patched in others, ringed a rough rectangle around the livestock pens, the little corral, and the fire ring where every night a fresh stack of split pine went up in whooshing flames that smelled of sap and tar. The first days flashed by in a happy blur. Breakfast cooked over smoky embers, day hikes to pools so clear we could count trout flicking through green light, afternoon volleyball on grass that sloped just enough to give one side unfair advantage. We spent evenings roasting sausages and marshmallows until sugar crusted our lips, then sprawling on logs while each voice in turn tried to outdo the last, with tales of ghosts, serial killers, and forest folk who crept on goat hooves beneath new moons. Most yarns came straight from late-night horror forums or half-remembered movies. Everyone screamed in the right places, laughed afterward, forgot the fear as soon as someone switched topics to music or crushes or plans for the final beach weekend of summer. During those first 8 days, I never felt uneasy. The cabins smelled of fresh-cut boards, the tents of warm nylon drying in sun, the air of meadow flowers mixed with pine needles. Even the wolf hybrid, Keith, our resident counselor called him, though the name never matched the wild light in the animal's amber eyes, kept mostly to pacing lazy circles inside his enclosure, tail wagging each time he spotted a snack tossed through the wire. Everything felt almost too perfect. Like the polished opening act of a stage play before the curtains rip and the real story lunges forward. Day 9 broke with a sky the color of hammered tin. Thin veils of mist unrolled from ravines, so slowly the world looked breathless. Our counselors canceled the hike and instead organized a morning of archery lessons near the barn. After lunch, they set up a clumsy scavenger hunt that Finn Jensen and Marcy accidentally found the finish marker after 5 minutes. With the day's schedule wrecked and the ridge trails slick from drizzle, the head leaders called early supper. By then, low clouds bunched purple along western peaks, threatening steady rain. But around 6, the wind shifted, dragged the heaviest vapor north, and left behind a sky powdered with bruised lavender light, a perfect backdrop for a long night of stories. We built the fire as dusk slid deeper, stacking split pine and cedar, until sparks coiled into the gathering blue. That evening, a second ring of benches appeared, dragged over by the leaders, so everyone could squeeze close, legs touching shoulders, backs pressed knee to knee. I ended up on the log nearest the sagging fence, the only person with nothing behind but the wire and a tangle of thick shrubbery that grew up wild on the other side. The bushes were dense, glossy leaves overlapping like fish scales, and though I told myself I chose the seat because I liked the warmth, I also knew part of me thrilled at the idea of having blackness behind my shoulder. The same way children thrill at daring each other to step into a shed rumored to be haunted. The horses had finished their feed and meandered to the far corner of their paddock. The rescued deer snuffled at straw but remained close to her shelter. Keith the wolf hybrid made lazy loops inside his pen, nose lifted toward our smell of wood smoke and butter-dripped bread. In daylight, the animal's presence felt comforting. In firelight, their silhouettes hunched like something half-wild reclaimed by shadow. Everyone settled. The flames crackled. Cicadas droned deeper among trees, their buzz syncopated with an owl that hooted once every minute like a metronome. Reed, one of our counselors, declared the usual rule. No story repeats and no story stops till the teller's done. We laughed, clapped, waited as the first volunteer launched into a predictable retelling of the hook-handed killer. Groans followed. She finished strong anyway. Another voice shared a local legend about miners buried in a forgotten shaft. More shrieks, more laughter. We passed a dented tin of caramel corn around the circle until fingers stuck sugary. One by one, the tales wound on. On the far side of the flames, faces stretched fierce, then softened to grin. Time lost track of itself.
Eventually, the circle quieted and Reed pointed the poker at me. "Your turn," he said. "Better scare us good." I nodded, swallowed a sip of water, and inhaled wood smoke to center myself. I had decided before the night began that I would spin the tale of the goat man, the same story older cousins once told me beneath a porch roof during a thunderstorm, a story that haunted my childhood dreams until I learned every variation just to rob it of fangs. The version I liked best started with a spider trickster named Anansi, because everything about Goatman is a web of tricks, and wound through a campsite, a flashlight gone dead, a knocking at the door, voices that didn't match the faces speaking them. I figured the group would enjoy it, especially the seated mix of skeptics eager to laugh at country myths and believers certain every dark patch hides antlers and teeth. So I began. Voice low, deliberate, leaning forward so the fire painted flickering stripes across my cheeks. I described Anansi spinning stories and catching people inside them like flies. I painted the campers inside the doomed trailer, lights flickering, whispers shredding into shrieks. I came to the point where the boy in the tale hears something brush the wall behind his bunk, and at that exact second a branch snapped inches behind my back. The sound was so sharp, so close, that instinct yanked my muscles tight. I jerked forward, nearly vaulting over the flames. Sparks leapt onto my boots. Half the circle exploded upward in yells. Vlad, tall, broad-shouldered, flashlight already in hand for dramatic effect earlier, swiveled and stabbed the beam into the thicket behind me. The white cone cut through layers of leaves, but caught only tattered darkness between, no source of the noise. Every eye locked on that narrow shaft of brilliance, waiting. Stars looked down cold and distant. For 5 long minutes nobody breathed deeply. Vlad's light-traced branches slipped over vines,
Halted on the barbed wire where strands glinted like icicles. Nothing moved except the flame hissing against fresh sap inside split logs. Eventually Reed exhaled and told everyone to sit. Something must have fallen, he said. Maybe a lanky raccoon or a limb loosened by the storm that never came. I nodded, throat dry. Vlad kept his flashlight uplifted for another uneasy sweep, then lowered it. We returned to the fire in staggered silence. My heart slowed only gradually. The wood popped. I resumed the story. My voice sounded clearer than I felt. I recounted how the doomed campers heard whispering outside despite padlocks on doors. The characters began to suspect one of their friends stood among them wearing the wrong voice. Cries escalated. I neared the section detailing the girl clutching a curtain while footsteps scuffed past her window. When I spoke the line about her sudden, rattling scream, a new sound answered from the real bushes behind me. A rustling, deliberate, like a hand sweeping flat across wide leaves. Rustle, rustle, slow, mocking. My words evaporated mid-sentence. Gooseflesh prickled every inch of my skin. Peter, 6'2", broad as a farm gate, whipped round and yelled, "Knock it off, whoever's doing that, enough!" But the rustle ceased instantly, as though a paw froze mid-motion. Silence fell again, heavier. Only now the animals reacted. The rescued deer slammed her body against the far side of her pen, hooves clattering on planks as she bolted in frantic circles. Keith, who usually trotted sleek and restless all night, had disappeared into the darkest corner of his kennel. A low, hopeless whine drifted from his den. Both horses tossed heads, whites of eyes shining like mirrors, backpedaling until they stood at the paddock's opposite fence, pressed so tight the boards creaked. What courage we boys possessed seeped out with the next fissure of wind that curled cold around our ankles. Every girl's eyes widened. Reed tried to chuckle.
Mouthed the usual counselor assurance, probably just a fox, they skulk near garbage. But the words tripped over the sound of his own heartbeat echoing between his ears. I felt each thump of my pulse in my back teeth. I spoke quickly, promising I was near the end and we could go. One girl rose and called into the dark, voice trembling but loud. "If this is a prank, seriously enough." Footsteps crunched near the lit path. Two figures striding swiftly from the cottages. I glimpsed the familiar shape of Marcus, our head boy, and Sarah, our senior female counselor. They stopped outside the glow, confusion on their faces. "All right, joke's over," Marcus called. "Back to dorms." A murmur rippled through our group. We had seen both Marcus and Sarah inside earlier, busy locking pantry doors, counting first aid inventories. But between the time they left the lodge and reached us, only moments had passed. No one could have circled through the bushes, frightened the animals, and still arrived from the opposite direction, unless two people had. We threw dirt over glowing coals and stomped embers with boots. Smoke smelled thicker suddenly, touched with something rotten. Someone said maybe sour meat slid off a skewer. Another muttered that manure behind the paddock needed shoveling. I recognized sulfur. That stink of eggs spoiled beyond recognition, carries in chemistry classrooms and nightmares equally. As we worked to suffocate every last ember, an inhuman noise rose not 5 steps behind me. It sounded first like a goat bleating, except stretched longer, flattened, pitch-bending high, then lower, in a warble that scraped along backbone bones. I spun. Vlad's flashlight washed across 2 orbs before it flickered from reflection overload. Eyes, yellow, bright as candle flames, but colder, too steady, sat just above the sag of the barbed wire top strand. They floated at a height that suggested the creature stood tall, maybe 6 feet or more if it crouched slightly. Everyone froze.
The yellow eyes did not blink in the white beam. They glowed, holding light, sending it back doubled. They seemed to study us one by one, as though weighing each pulse. 10 seconds, 20 an hour. I will never know. Time warped itself into a slow swirl where nothing existed but the burn of those pupils. Then the goat bleat slid into a human-like screech and back again, an elastic tearing sound that filled every hollow in my chest with terror. Lips peeled back to reveal triangular teeth. The mouth opened wider, impossible wide, as though hinges sat not beside but beneath the face. The smell of sulfur thickened till my stomach lurched. We broke. Fear stamped in muscle memories. Some leaped past the still smoldering pit, scattering sparks across scarred soil. Others collided against benches. I shot upright and sprinted toward the cottages, glimpsing over my shoulder to check where the eyes moved. They floated out from the shrub line, still shining even though Vlad's flashlight now bobbed 20 feet ahead as he ran. The eyes glimmered without beam or moon, a glow of their own. They tracked us but did not lunge, not yet. Marcus shouted for order, voice cracking, then gave in to flight himself. We slammed inside the nearest cottage, cursing and gasping. Marcus dragged a bolt across the door, unheard of until that night. We never locked up. Windows rattled as Sarah shoved latches tight. Inside the big cabin, everyone huddled under bunk rails, whimpering. Even Reed's forced jokes died. Outside, something paced along the boards. Floorboards muffled its hooves or feet, thudding softly, methodically testing each wall. Keith's kennel rattled once, then went silent. A soft clank suggested the deer's water bucket kicked. The pacing halted. Minutes stretched, brittle as frost. Eventually we heard lumber creak outside. then nothing. Silence took over except for nervous breathing. A drizzle began again, tapping shingles. Morning felt years away, but dawn came all the same, blue and thin. We crept out in twos and threes. Dew silvered every nailhead, and the forest smelled washed. Yet the clearing told a story night could not hide. The fire pit was smashed inward, benches overturned. The shrub line where I had sat now leaned outward, limbs snapped as if crushed under a weight. The barbed wire fence sagged in a fresh semicircle. One strand hung in tatters, the metal ripped loose from posts. In the dirt beneath, a hole gaped, wide enough for a barrel chest to squeeze through, and beyond that, prints. 2 hooved imprints deeper than a deer's, longer than the horse's, spaced oddly far apart for the stride of an animal only waist high. Marcus, who knelt to inspect, went pale. I saw his hands tremble as he traced the edges of a cleft print large as his own forearm. He whispered when he spoke. "I came after you last night to stamp embers. Halfway back I smelled rot. I heard the fence groan. Something was bent over it, tall, hunched, eyes like lantern glass. I ran. Didn't tell you because I thought I'd imagined it. But now..." For the rest of camp we stuck to broad daylight hikes, always in view of one counselor. Nights passed indoors with curtains drawn. No more bonfires. The wolf refused to leave his den, even for food. The horses shied each time breeze rattled branches. On the last day, as buses idled, I saw Marcus alone by the fence again, studying the distant gloom with an expression that mixed regret, fear, and something heavier, guilt perhaps, the weight of authority broken by something no training covered. I walked to him. He motioned me close, voice nearly breaking. "I saw prints on the far side," he said. "Not hog, not elk, cloven but wrong. Followed downhill 50 yards, then lost them in rock. Whatever it is, it watched us. Your story didn't summon it. It was already here." We boarded buses. The mountain road wound us away under perfect sun, yet inside every seat the chill clung. When I returned to normal life, classes, chores, friendships, I carried the campfire night tucked under my heartbeat. I stopped volunteering for small group hikes, stuck to big crowds. Whenever friends begged for scary stories, I refused to tell Goatman again. Some tales feed on retelling. Some names are invitations. If you sit with your back to the fence and you dare to speak them, remember that bushes do not rustle without wind, wolves do not whimper without reason, and sometimes the thing behind you listens, waiting to open its mouth wider than seems possible, just to show you it is there, has always been there, whether the story finds voice or not. Jack and I had talked about crossing half the country for years, sitting on the tailgate of my old pickup while the sun dropped behind the foothills west of Boise, promising that one day we would leave work and bills and small-town routines and just drive. We wanted 2 things, the open road and the little brown farmhouse in Michigan where my cousins lived, a place that had welcomed me since I was 10. In July, 2 summers ago, those daydream promises finally turned into plans on paper. We saved gas money, cleared vacation time, changed brake pads and spark plugs, and one bright Thursday morning, we pulled away from my apartment with nothing in front of us but a line of asphalt that reached all the way to the Great Lakes. We drove slow on purpose. The distance between Idaho and Michigan is supposed to take barely 2 long travel days, but we stretched it into almost a week. We stopped to photograph every weird roadside statue and every painted water tower, wandered through ghost town ruins south of the Black Hills, bought hot caramel corn at a county fair in Minnesota, camped 3 nights in small state parks where fireflies stitched glowing threads through humid air. Each night we threw our sleeping bags on dirt still warm from daylight and fell asleep to coyote yips or to the hush of wind spinning leaves. On the last morning before we reached my cousin's land, we parked on the gravel shoulder of a river bridge in Wisconsin so Jack could fish. He caught a sunfish the size of his palm. We released it, laughed, and then rolled east once more under a sky so bright it looked washed clean. Late on that 6th evening, we turned down the familiar lane to my cousin Caleb's farm. The headlights cut twin tunnels through tall corn. When the house came into view, its porch lamps glowed gold, and children's shadows raced across the boards to meet us. Caleb and his wife Marissa stepped onto the lawn, waving. They hugged us hard.